Hello and welcome back to the Liverpool Echoes Blood Red podcast. I'm Matt Addison with Paul Gorst and Theo Squires both with me for today's show. Pre-season is of course underway. We'll be having a chat about that shortly. There's news of an extended shirt sponsorship agreement as well, plus the game with Crystal Palace to come on Friday. Hence why you're going to hear from us a day earlier in the week than usual. We've got all the content around the game, of course, tomorrow, but we thought it would be best to bring you the Blood Red show today. So we'll get stuck in, Gorsty. There's some not so good news to start with. Diogo Jota has had a scan. He's picked up an injury in training on Wednesday. What's the sort of details that we know so far on him, and how much of a blow do you think that is for him potentially?
Well, to be honest, I think the person who's best placed to answer this one is Ian Doyle, because he's out in Singapore with the team, and he was at the press conference this morning. Wasn't actually on any of the YouTube channels or anything like that, so perhaps news that hasn't reached everyone really. But yeah, Diogo Jota has kind of it's suspected that he's potentially kind of hurt the hamstring that he was working on recovering. So we'll have a scan on that, and it will obviously reveal more, and then Liverpool will be able to take it from there. So we're a little bit unsure at the moment, but it's not good news, is it, however way you look at it. But it's a bit of a shame, because he was looking to get back from that hamstring injury that he suffered on international duty with Portugal. It was one of those injuries that I'd completely forgotten about until we were reminded of it one day last week, with it coming in the international fixtures, and sometimes you just tune out of it all, don't you, when it's when the national games are getting played. So yeah, it's one that he will have had for well over a month now, which is a little bit frustrating for him, particularly when he's looking to get some proper minutes under his belt for pre-season and really get in that solid schedule that puts the players in such a good stead for the coming season. So yeah, it's a disappointing setback, but I mean, I suppose on the other side of the coin is at least it's come now. Early in pre-season, they can rehab it and get it back to full strength as quickly as possible, and hopefully it shouldn't impact them being able to start the Premier League season in just under a month's time. But yeah, it's a little bit disappointing for him, because no doubt he will have been ready to go and looking to get back in the thick of it as he aims to rival Darwin Nunez, I guess, for Liverpool's number 9 role, and Roberto Firmino as well. So yeah, a little bit of a frustrating few weeks for Jota, it looks like.
Yeah, it was only, I think, on Monday that he was talking about how excited he was to come back. Obviously, wasn't going to play in the United game, but potentially could have played in the Palace game. Certainly won't be now. But I suppose the key point, Theo, is, like Gorsty says there, he's got Darwin Nunez there now. He's got Luis Diaz, who plays in the other position that he can play in as well. It kind of felt like he probably could have done with an uninterrupted pre-season. He could have really done with that this summer to just kind of stake his claim and put himself into Jurgen Klopp's thinking for the start of this season.
Yeah, it's a strange one with Diogo Jota, because you think it was only probably, January, February time where he was closing in on 20 goals. He'd fired Liverpool to a League Cup final, and he was this go-to striker. He was the main man in this Liverpool front three when they lost Salah and Mane to the Cup of Nations. And then they signed Diaz, and he sort of lost his place in the team. I think he got a couple of knocks, didn't he, as the season went on, and he just wasn't as impactful in those final weeks as Liverpool went for a quadruple as he had been for the first 2/3 of the campaign. We know how much he loves a goal, and he would have definitely wanted, as he said, been firing him in early in pre-season to rival Nunez, rival Firmino, and stake his claim. Because I think, was it last few weeks of last season, he was more on the left and having his chance to play this central role. And you're thinking, if Liverpool now with this new target man up front, well, that's meaning more balls into the box in the air, which we know, despite his size, Jota's very good at getting at the end of it. It could suit him even more. We know how much he loves following things up and getting rebounds and stuff like that. But then if he's injured, there's no suggestion that it's anything serious at this point. They are just waiting for the scan results. There's still that reminder of what happened with Roberto Firmino last year, when he got one hamstring injury, and then that turned to 2, and then that turned to 3, and it just bugged him throughout the whole season. You think, if he had one in June, he's out a month, and then he gets a niggle now. If he's out for another month for the start of the season, it's not how you want your preparations to go. Last year, Liverpool finished the season with 7 senior forwards, where they had Mane, Origi, Minamino. But while I'm not saying the numbers are short, if Jota's absent, then there is limitations on those senior options there. It's one where they're having to go from so many professionals who have played international football, and you can stake a claim to, if you lose a star player, you're relying on Carvalho or Harvey Elliott, Curtis Jones. They're not as proven in these front three positions in the Premier League. It's a new situation for Liverpool. It's frustrating for Diogo Jota, but it's why Liverpool have gone and spent so much on Diaz. It's why they've gone and spent so much on Nunez. So they've got the elite options at least who can start. He's just going to have to be playing catch up, and you just hope no one else gets any knocks, that Salah can fire in the goals against Palace, that Nunez can, that Firmino can put the injuries behind him, and Diaz just continues to be as exciting as he has been ever since he first walked through the door.
Yeah, Theo mentions Roberto Firmino there, Ghost. He's someone that I've written about this morning, actually, just off the back of that Jota news. It kind of feels like he's a bit of a forgotten man almost, if that's not too harsh a way to put it. But I suppose for him, if there is a little bit of an injury for the next couple of weeks for Diogo Jota, it just kind of goes to show really how quickly that pecking order can change. And someone like Firmino, from kind of being fifth choice, there's maybe just a little bit more of a glimmer for him now to stake a bit of a claim over the next few weeks, regardless of how long Jota's out for.
Yeah, I had the chance to head up to the Liverpool training ground last week, as part of a pack to speak to Jurgen Klopp, and he was saying about almost the differences between Darwin Nunez and Roberto Firmino as a centre forward. He said, does he want Nunez to play like Roberto Firmino? Not at all. So I think that the contrast in their playing styles gives Liverpool different options. Essentially, it's not necessarily a like for like, even though they're in the same position, aren't they? He still refers to Firmino as a false nine, even though he's played as a striker essentially for all of his Liverpool career now, hasn't he? Which is coming up to 7 years. So I think it's probably does offer him a little bit of a chance. Klopp was effusive in his praise for how well he'd been playing in that week in pre-season. To be fair, it'd only been 3 or 4 days, I think. But he said that Bobby is back 100% and a world-class talent. And of course, Klopp's always very, he doesn't hesitate to talk up his players, does he, in terms of their contributions. But I think it is a big season for Firmino. It's the first one that he's not heading into it as part of a first choice front three. It's the first one that Liverpool go into in years that it's not Salah, Mane and Firmino in that front three. Jota kind of usurped them at a certain stage last season, and Diaz came into the team in January, or rather the beginning of February. And now there's Nunez in there. Liverpool have spent major money on him, so they're not expecting him to be a dud. So he's going to be looking to play more often than not. So, for the first time in years, really, probably the first time in his Liverpool career, Firmino's heading into a pre-season knowing that he might not necessarily be playing most weeks. So if that's a motivating factor for him, then so be it. That's only good news for Liverpool. But yeah, he's no busted flush. Firmino, he's never been, Liverpool's most prolific forward during his time at the club, particularly since Mane and Salah have joined on over the years. But I still think maybe one or two have kind of forgotten how good he can be, and I hope that a full pre-season is key to him hitting the ground running when the season does eventually start.
Yeah, had a few injuries, didn't he, last year? But when he did play, he did actually have a decent sort of scoring record in terms of the minutes that he played. Big year as well for him in the last year of his contract, but we'll see kind of what happens with that. Let's move on to the standard chartered deal, Gorsley. I'll come back to you on this one in terms of just going through the details. We'll have a little bit of a chat around the sort of wider picture as well with FSG and the finances. But just in terms of the shirt sponsorship deal, what do we know from this morning?
Yeah, so it's they've signed a new contract with Standard Chartered that'll take them up to 17 seasons as Liverpool's main shirt sponsor, which is only one behind the legendary name of Carlsberg, which I think we all grew up, didn't we, with Carlsberg being on the front of Liverpool shirts. Still obviously closely connected to the club, but yeah, Standard Chartered kind of the it's the logo of the FSG era, if you like, because they came in 2010 and they've just flourished. So Liverpool's existing deal, which was signed in 2018, is worth around £40 million per year to them. This one is a new 4-year contract, which I believe begins the start of next season, and it's worth upwards of around about £50 million. So a significant jump in terms of what they were in, and 25%, obviously, which is a big increase, really. But I think, I wrote a piece today. If you speak to anyone kind of in the FSG circle, I had a chance to speak to Tom Werner just before the end of last season and Billy Hogan in the same week, the CEO and the chairman. And they both referenced this virtuous cycle, and it's something that the former CEO Peter Moore said to me, in previous conversations. This idea that success on the pitch leads to further opportunities for growth off the pitch, which in turn leads for more money to continue the success on the pitch. So it's just this idea of feeding itself and continuing on. And in an era where Liverpool are battling against the absolute, some of the absolute richest teams in world football, in City and Chelsea and of course Manchester United, it's a very big deal. It's Liverpool's biggest ever shirt sponsorship deal. Absolutely no question of that. I was looking at the historical ones, and the first one with Hitachi was worth £50,000 a year. It's incredible now when you think they're worth 50 million. So yeah, it's good news for Liverpool. They're continuing on a very flourishing partnership, and ultimately, whilst to the everyday supporter who just want to see Liverpool winning on the pitch, it might not mean a whole lot, but sooner or later, it will be of benefit to Liverpool, whether that's increasing the salaries of players like Mohamed Salah, or the host of contracts he signed last year, or whether it's bringing new players to the club. Ultimately, it is more money in the coffers for Liverpool, and that has to be a good thing.
Yeah, it's all interlinked, isn't it, Theo, in terms of the FSG model, the way that they've tried to run Liverpool. As Gorsley says, the more sort of success Liverpool have on the pitch, that leads to off the pitch, it leads to on the pitch. It's just a cycle that you don't really want to ever see broken, do you?
No, it's not. It's one way we've grown up when United have been the ones with all these record sponsorship deals, whether it's shirt providers or anything like this, and you're looking at it going, why can't Liverpool get those sorts of figures when they've been the dominant force in English and European football for so long? And it's just they fell off that top table just as all these sorts of figures were coming into it, and football really took that next step, and they missed out big time. It took them 20, 30 years to catch up again, and now it's, you're making up for lost time here. Now you are at the very top here. You can set the fees you want, get the deals you want, and you should be the leading team, leading brand in the market. Success on the pitch will in turn get even more in terms of these deals, get more lucrative deals, getting a better choice of deals, and it's just what you want to see. While it's not really something that you're going to be as happy talking about, like this ugly side to the ever-growing riches in football, at least it shows that Liverpool are moving in a direction, that everything's ticking along nicely on the pitch and off it. And it's credit to what FSG have implemented since they bought the club, that they haven't just installed a manager and a sporting director and all these staff members to get it right with the players that can win the Premier League, win the Champions League. It's making sure that they're getting these best possible deals behind the scenes as well. So as Gorsley says, it helps them obviously with transfer fees, with contract negotiations. And when you're bought by this Liverpool team, FSG did, it would be to make them one of the very best teams in world football again. They've certainly delivered that. And sponsorship deals like this, when they're one of the leading ones in the market, it's definitely an example of that once again.
Yeah, the Manchester United comparison, actually, Gorsley, is an interesting one. Obviously, both of them in Asia at the moment, played each other on Tuesday. It's a huge thing in terms of their brand, isn't it? And I've seen a lot of people actually over there. Maybe this is just sort of coming at it from a Liverpool perspective, maybe, but kind of saying that the Reds are now edging it over Manchester United in that region in terms of the number of fans and all of that kind of thing. And I suppose it's all part of that bigger picture, isn't it? This is what Liverpool have been working towards. There is that gap still to Manchester United, but they're certainly on the right pathway to closing that.
Yeah, it might be a kind of uncomfortable truth that some people don't want to confront, but Liverpool and Manchester United are very, very similar, and have got a good working relationship, certainly off the pitch. Both owned by American owners, and are both kind of, I suppose, threatened is the word, if I can't think of a better one, in terms of the growth of Manchester City's project and Chelsea's over the last 20 years. United and Liverpool were the established order, weren't they, in the 80s and the 90s, and Chelsea and City very much alongside them now in terms of growth. I don't think City are anywhere near the Liverpool and United in terms of fan base or worldwide appeal, but certainly, from a monetary position, City are as strong as anyone else. So Liverpool have worked closely with United to ensure that there was that glamorous, all singing, all dancing friendly in Thailand on Tuesday. Both looking to kind of grow in that market this summer, and by all accounts, seems to be doing it quite well. Ultimately, success on the pitch is what leads to more kind of eyeballs on your brand, isn't it? And Liverpool, since he last visited the Far East, they've gone from being a team who just qualified for the Champions League, the top four on the last day of the season, to a team that have won the absolute lot since. So, that's only going to grow the fan base in those areas across the world, really. You see now, everywhere you go, you bump into a Liverpool fan. So at the moment, Liverpool and United, undoubtedly still the two biggest clubs in England. Probably still in the top five in terms of world football, despite United's regression over the last about 4 or 5 years. But two clubs who've been working together really, for some time to make sure that there are these money spinning friendlies in the diary. Obviously, it didn't go to Liverpool's plan on the pitch, but ultimately that trip to Thailand is one that will be hugely beneficial down the line, and so will the one in Singapore now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a few more details on the Bottom Line podcast that came out, I think, a couple of days ago. So if anyone's interested in diving into that, Dave Powell had a chat with Guy Clark, so you can go back and have a listen through that podcast. But two players, Theo, who will wear Standard Chartered on the front of their shirts for the first time next season. A seamless link there towards Darwin Nunez and Fabio Carvalho. Let's start with Darwin Nunez. I know it's only been a couple of days, particularly for him, but he's come in, a big price tag. Any sort of early impressions or anything that you've spotted with him so far, or is it just too early in his Liverpool career?
Despite what I'm sure plenty of fan sites and opposition will have you think, it's far too early to say. News now was an interesting state along with social media, shall we say, after that missed chance against Manchester United. But it's early days, like you can't really take much out of that United friendly when you look at Liverpool treating it as something of getting minutes in the legs, getting fitness levels up, those 3 30-minute sides of putting legs together. But for Nunez, there were early promising signs, at least, like linking up with Trent Alexander-Arnold, making those, I suppose, diagonal runs with balls over the top that we've not really seen Liverpool do to that extent before, showing that they are implementing this new take on attacking style to make them unpredictable. He was getting in the box. He was making himself a nuisance. Yeah, there was a bit of rustiness there, but that's always going to be the case when it's coming the first game of pre-season. We've only been training with the squad for a couple of days, having linked up a week after everyone else and with the rest of the internationals. Still had a good shot that Tom Heaton kept out. He was a bit of a nuisance, but you're not going to be judging whether Darwin Nunez is an £85 million player off half an hour against Manchester United in mid-July in Thailand. You're going to be judging it on what he achieves over the season. You're not bothered if he scores or not against United now. You're bothered if he goes and does it at Old Trafford in August, September time. That's when you can start to really judge him. Now it's just about getting the fitness in the legs and seeing the start of those blossoming relationships on the pitch with the likes of Salah and Trent. Early signs, yeah, it's a step in the right direction. Not much else you can say, really.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I suppose it's a little bit similar for Carvalho as well, Ghost. He's been in pre-season for a little bit longer. Lots of people getting excited about his performance. But as much as there were positive things, I'm sure there's still plenty more to come from him throughout the rest of this summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. Like, people look to make big conclusions from small sample sizes in pre-season. They haven't seen Liverpool in action for 5 or 6 weeks, and excited to see new players in the team and whatever else. But good, bad, or indifferent, you'd hesitate to make any kind of definitive point of view. Certainly from one friendly, but from an entire pre-season schedule, really. We've seen Liverpool generally in the past get beat every single pre-season friendly pretty much, and then as soon as the season starts they turn it on and they're still the team that we all remember. I remember one, was it the season after they won the Champions League? I think they didn't win a game. I think they drew one, and the rest they lost. I think they drew with Sevilla possibly, and they were beaten by Dortmund, Napoli, and
Sporting.
Yeah, they got battered in Edinburgh, didn't they?
Yeah. And then they went and won the Premier League by 18 points, and probably would have been closer to 30 had it not been for the strange, COVID season. But it's as Theo says, it's all just about fitness in the legs. The coaching staff take over at this time of the year, don't they? And for me, it's the pre-season really picks up once you get into the European leg of it, when Klopp can shake off all the commercial, things that are in the diary, and he can just get to work with his players, tight knit kind of community. There's no pressing allowed, and there's nothing, no extracurricular things that are getting in the way of just double sessions and team bonding. That's when you start to see it all really take shape. So yeah, it was a really disappointing game on Tuesday, certainly for the fans who were there, who paid an arm and a leg to get there as well. But ultimately it doesn't really matter, does it? That's it's all full steam ahead towards Fulham on August the 5th or the 6th or whatever it is. So yeah, absolutely no issues at all with anyone's performance really. Not least Darwin Nunez, who was given half an hour up top. I'm sure we'll see the best of him further down the line.
Yeah, you'd happily take 4-0 defeats to United in pre-season if you're beating them 5-0 and 4-0 in the Premier League. And just to add on to whether you judge him in pre-season, I seem to remember Dominic Solanke and Andre Voronin being quite prolific in pre-season. It's hardly something you can judge their Liverpool careers on. Didn't really do that when it got serious. But then Fabio Carvalho, at the same time, he looked exciting. He was getting forward, linking up well, already at blossoming partnership with Luis Diaz. He was unlucky not to score. Really good technique when he brought the ball down in his chest and whacked it against the post. As bad as a defeat it looks on paper, 4-0. It's 4 defensive errors, really, that cost Liverpool. And they could have scored 4 themselves. They created enough chances. And it's one where, say, Carvalho's shot nestles in the bottom corner, Nunez's rebound is below the crossbar. Liverpool lose 4-2, but they've got the fitness. They've got those 2 goals. Everyone's happy as you can be for a defeat against United. It's just those small margins. And as Liverpool are a team that have lost Premier League titles and Champions League titles by small margins, you're not bothered when it's pre-season. Yeah, I know Jurgen Klopp says there's no such thing as a friendly against Manchester United, but that's why you don't normally have it as your very first friendly. So you get the defeat out the way against someone daft early on, and then you find a bit of rhythm. But yeah, it's just the fitness. They've pulled that shirt on for the first time. They've seen some fans over there. But Crystal Palace, that's going to be another weird friendly when they don't have many senior players out as well. So as Gorsley said, you're just waiting for them to get back to Europe. When they're playing Leipzig, when they're playing Salzburg, Strasbourg, Man City, that's when you can start to have a really true first impression of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan Brewster, another one that was prolific in pre-season.
Exactly.
Didn't last much longer after that. So, yeah, can't draw too many conclusions. Let's just talk a little bit around Crystal Palace tomorrow. Again, not many conclusions that we can expect to be drawn from it, Gorsley, but how similar are you expecting it to be in terms of the United game? I think it was, 32 different players that we saw play in that one. Do you reckon it's going to be something similar again?
Yeah, I do. I think that'll start to steadily decrease as we get nearer and nearer to the season. But with it still being the second game of the season, still in the kind of similar climate to the one they were in Bangkok, in terms of you don't want to give anyone 60, 70, 80 minutes to you in that kind of humidity. I still think it'll be similar. We're not sure if Alisson's going to be involved, are we? Because he's apparently suffered some discomfort. Jota, not expecting him to be involved, but generally I think it will be a similar situation of sweeping changes on the 30, the 60, and maybe 1 or 2 at half time as well. So yeah, I think it will be more of the same, really. I mean, it just shows you kind of Klopp's, when Klopp says he's open to being surprised and being, open to everyone catching his eye, he means it, doesn't he? Because there doesn't appear to be any great value in giving Luke Chambers too much time, for example. Isaac Mabea, you don't want to be, you're not expecting them to be anywhere near the Premier League team when it starts in August. But the fact that Klopp's giving everyone a go shows you that he is committed to seeing if there is a little hidden gem that's somewhere that he hasn't quite stumbled across yet, or he can see something that he can work with. So yeah, it was difficult keeping track of the changes and the team sheets and whatever else the other day. But yeah, I'm expecting once again there to be plenty of changes to the Liverpool 11 in that game against Palace.
Yeah, invaluable for Luke Chambers and Bobby Clark and Stefan Bajcetic and all of those young players. I'm sure they took a great deal from it. Theo, who are you most looking forward to seeing a little bit more of tomorrow? Is it the new signings, the young players, bit of a mixture, or what are your thoughts heading into that one?
I guess it's the new signings again, isn't it? Those are the ones you don't know anything about. And well, it's good to see the kids getting their involvement, getting some minutes. When they're involved, it's more about giving them that first taste. Like, it's probably a step too far for them at this stage, but it's about learning from the senior pros, seeing how they handle this sort of tour, seeing how big the club is in like the far corners of the world, so they can really have this eye-opening experience. And then they'll go back to Barry Lutis's side and the under-18s, and they'll work there and then have to work up to this stage again. So it's really looking at the players that are actually going to be part of this first team for the season in the opening weeks at least. And it is the Fabio Carvalho. He was the shining light against United, but you want to see more from like Harvey Elliott, these players that were a bit unfortunate last year because of injuries or whatever, who showed glimpses. You want to see someone that can make a difference to the starting 11 and show Liverpool adapting and progressing forward again. I think we're always excited when you see Luis Diaz step foot on the pitch. He's just such an exciting player, makes things happen out of nothing. But then, as the case is most of this squad, you know what to expect for them. It's just Jurgen Klopp working with them again and trying to get them to reach this new standard. So it's just going to have to be new faces. Not much else you can really take from it. Like, you're not expecting as good a performance as any of the youngsters could have. You're not expecting Bobby Clark to be a false nine against Fulham on the opening day of the season or anything like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's finish off then with a little bit of a random topic to throw in. Not many transfer sort of stories to get into with Liverpool, but certainly a few other teams around the Premier League doing a fair bit of business. Ghosty Raheem Sterling to Chelsea. It's an interesting one. It seems like a really good signing to me, and I can't quite work out why City have let him go there, to be honest.
I mean, the way football is now at the moment, there's only so many teams who can afford a top Premier League player. That pool is dwindling. So if there are not many buyers and you need to raise your money to balance the FFP books or whatever it may be, I suppose you're at the mercy of who the buyers are. So in an ideal world, I don't think City would have loved to send Raheem Sterling to Chelsea. I think they would have preferred them to have gone somewhere out of sight and out of mind, like a Real Madrid, for example. But that's just what clubs are at the mercy of at the moment. So I think in the next few years, I think we're going to see a lot more of these types of transfers, to be honest, between big clubs in the Premier League, just because of what I've outlined there. And we've seen Sadio Mane go to Bayern Munich this summer, but even for them, that's a deal that's quite pricey for Bayern Munich. They don't tend to make loads and loads of signings of that kind of 40 million mark, 40 million, over it. Barcelona are difficult to second guess what they're going to be doing at the moment, isn't it? Real Madrid don't seem to be. I mean, they've just bought already and Tchouameni for quite a high price, but they're not spending 200 million every summer like they used to in years gone by. So I suppose on one hand it was a little bit surprising that City have allowed it, but maybe it also hints that the status of where they find themselves at the moment and where Chelsea find themselves, maybe they just think they're not going to be challenging us certainly next season anyway. So off he goes, and we can use that money elsewhere. It's almost. I mean, if they got more for Sterling than they bought Haaland for, there's not much in it either way, is there? I know Haaland was a 51 million buyout clause, so in terms of that, it's very good business for City, isn't it? But Sterling's he's only 27, so he's still going to be one of the main men for Chelsea next season. So it was an interesting one, but I think it's going to become a bit of a trend, to be honest.
Yeah, certainly something to keep an eye on, I think, over the next couple of seasons. Just in terms of the kind of pecking order at the top of the Premier League, Theo, I mean, where do you sort of see Chelsea next season? Tottenham in there as well. They've spent a fair bit of money. I'm not quite convinced as some people are on Tottenham signings, I have to be honest. But is it just going to be Liverpool and City again next season, or can you see either of those teams with the business that they've done coming anywhere near the top two?
Depends how these new signings settle in, isn't it? Like if Man City, even if Erling Haaland flops or gets injured, they showed last year they can win the title without a striker. So you're looking at them more how they cope without as much depth behind those players, having lost Jesus and Sterling, but they're still a very good starting 11 there. Liverpool, well, you look and see how well Nunez settles. If Salah can get back to that form of 2021, but those are still the runaway sides. Those are the two you expect to be the big two, and that's not going to change anytime soon. With Chelsea and Spurs, it's interesting because you'd say on paper at the moment, Spurs have got the edge. I know you've just ripped them off there yourself, Matt. In these signings, normally you'd say Spurs are going to Spurs it. But in Antonio Conte, they have got a genuinely world-class manager who can make the difference, who can take him to that next level. I'm not going to quite predict that he's going to have a Klopp effect over in North London, but he can make them a team that's going to be in the Champions League every single year, and who knows, might actually get them a trophy. They've already had good defenders, good attackers. They did well against the Big Six last year. Essentially, they could have cost Man City the title, but they cost Liverpool the title by getting those 2 draws. And now you throw it in Richarlison, Bissouma, Perisic, Lenglet. Got some good signings there that is at least making their top 4 place look a hell of a lot more certain. Chelsea, they need to do a bit more, but it's a good start for them. Sterling, as you said, is a really good signing. They've lost Lukaku, but it's not as though him as a main striker did much for them or as much as they'd like last year. Maybe still need a couple of defenders, but if they get Koulibaly in, which looks likely, they're getting another defender. He's going to have to point me out in the right direction. I've completely blanked, but they've got that money to spend and they're investing. Arsenal has done a decent bit of business as well, so you think they'd be 5th. The only thing you can say at the moment, despite beating Liverpool 4-0, is United still look a little bit off the pace. But Big Six are always going to be the Big Six. They're the teams with the money. They're the teams that can go and sign all these talents. I think United are still getting Martinez and De Jong today, apparently, if you read the reports. But yeah, Liverpool and City, they are the two. Chelsea and Spurs maybe close the gap a little bit, but not enough to change that pecking order just yet.
Yeah, no, I certainly think Tottenham will be in the top 4, but I'm not quite sure that spending 60 million on Richarlison was the most wisest thing to have done with that money, to be honest. Ghosty, are you any different? Are you any more convinced by Tottenham than I am, or are Chelsea still the ones to watch in terms of that 3rd best team?
I think it'll be a direct shootout between those two, to be honest, to finish 3rd. And I know at some point Chelsea might go top of the league in October or something, and all of a sudden it's talk of a title race and a title challenge, and it's the top 3. And I suppose we're all guilty of it. But where did they finish last season in terms of amount of points? Was it 19 points behind Manchester City, something like that? The gap now between that top 2 and the rest is just incredible, because I suppose they're kind of spurred on by each other, really, because Liverpool from January onwards knew that they couldn't really drop a point, and ultimately it was a draw with Tottenham, which is cost them. I say cost them in a kind of broad sense, because I don't think anyone ever really expected Liverpool to overhaul that gap when it was sitting at 13, 14 points in mid-January. They did incredibly well to get as close as they did, but yeah, I just think the top 2 are far too well coached and well managed, well drilled. We've got world class players in pretty much every position, and it's a huge task for the rest of them to kind of get near that level. So I think Tottenham might give Chelsea a little bit of a run for that 3rd spot. I still think United are some way off in terms of the makeup of their squad, even if Ten Hag is all that he's cracked up to be. He's got a massive job ahead of him, particularly if they lose Ronaldo and need to bring in another striker. So yeah, it's just, I'm reluctant to make, big sweeping predictions so early on, but it's going to be Liverpool or City again, isn't it?
The big difference is that with Liverpool and City, they're only making these small additions to what they've already had. They've had the success in recent years, and it's just, we'll make that small tweak by bringing in a new striker. Or Liverpool have got Ramsey as this backup right back. What they've already got there has already been built and delivered success in recent years. Whereas Chelsea, Spurs, United, we've fallen short yet again. We need to revamp this, throw in half a dozen players at it, completely change how we do things. Some obviously a lot more than others, but they are having to gamble and hoping that they can make a huge leaps and bounds with 1 or 2 right signings. Realistically, it takes longer than that. We know it takes longer than that from seeing Klopp have to build Liverpool up over 3-4 year period before he can make them these consistent challenges. That's why until one of them can take that big step, as Liverpool did in 18-19 when they were signing Fabio, Alisson, Keita, Shaqiri, that's the sort of window you need that success off it to go and win the Champions League or the Premier League. It's just going to be the runaway front two.
The interesting thing for me, sorry, Matt, is just kind of when BBC did the predictions and they asked, was it like 25 pundits and former professionals, and the amount of people who should know better, people who've been studying around the game for all of their lives essentially, and the recency bias of the transfers that cloud the minds. What was it? Who was it who picked Liverpool to finish fifth?
Beckford, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, Jermaine Beckford.
Everton, ex-Leicester.
Yeah, no one had Liverpool to finish. I mean, not many had Liverpool to finish second. Probably even fewer had them to finish in the league ahead of City. It's just the transfers take so much of the attention, not when the big, sizable transfers, and that's going to happen again because Chelsea are on a bit of a mission this summer under the new owner. They've just brought in Sterling. They're trying to get Khaled Koulibaly, and they're getting linked to everyone at the moment, aren't they? Because apparently Todd Bowley, if you believe what you're reading, is kind of just on a mission just to see who we can bring in. So Chelsea are going to continue to make eye-catching signings, and then you watch when the predictions come in the first week of August, how many people will just kind of forget that Liverpool are a team who've recorded point tallies of 92 and upwards in 3 of the last 4 seasons. It'll all just get forgotten because Chelsea have made a few big money signings, and they've spent money, they're going to be challenging. They won't. It's going to be Liverpool and it's going to be Manchester City, and it could go either way. You can't make a definitive call either way on it. It's going to be fascinating to watch again. But I'd imagine if Manchester United start spending a few quid, they're going to be getting mentioned, and it's just, come on, just what? I don't know. Maybe it's just me being grumpy and old, but it's just the amount of opinions that get swayed by incomings. It just never ceases to amaze me, really. I suppose the better you are, the less you have to make in the transfer market, which is why Liverpool have done so well in the last few years. They only signed. If you look at it, the last 2 seasons, you've only really signed 2 first-team players, haven't they? Diaz and Ibrahim Konate.
Won the league after signing Andy Lonergan. Don't need to sign players.
There you go. But yeah, won the Champions League, didn't he? And then didn't really sign anyone. Brought in Harvey Elliott and Seth Vandenberg and Adrian, and then went and won the league at a canter. So, it's like the actual football is just ignored because teams have made a few big transfers when the predictions come around. But if you're asking me now, in the middle of July, I'm saying it's going to be Manchester City or Liverpool in first spot come May 2023.
Yeah, totally agree. The idea that Liverpool could finish third with no centre-backs and then regress with centre-backs was always a slightly bizarre one. But I think that'll just about do us for today's podcast. As I mentioned earlier on, we'll have a live offering for you after Liverpool play Crystal Palace tomorrow. Loads more to come across the weekend as well as Liverpool come back to Europe, playing Leipzig next week, Red Bull Salzburg the week afterwards, all the build-up and all the reaction around all of those things in all of the usual places. For now, though, thank you very much for listening and goodbye for now.